Boy, apologize, now. That was the first time in my life I saw my uncle's face turn pale. The Navy SEAL, always calm, carved from steel, sounded like a father scolding a child who'd just spat on the flag. The whole backyard went silent. Even the grill stopped hissing as if the propane itself held its breath. Jake froze his beer halfway to his mouth. His smile, cocky, confident, the kind that always made me bite my tongue, vanished. I stood there with barbecue sauce on my fingers, holding a paper napkin, wondering how many more 4th of July gatherings it would take before my family stopped underestimating me. He didn't know who I was, not really. And truth be told, that night, I didn't plan to remind him. I'd driven 12 hours from Fort Rucker just to be here. I hadn't seen my family in nearly 3 years, not since I'd come back stateside, not since the funeral. They said it would be good for me to reconnect. But reconnecting isn't easy when half your relatives think you work in Army paperwork and the other half avoid saying the word Afghanistan. The Carter family barbecue was a yearly ritual in Virginia. American flags, fireworks, too much beer, and unspoken rivalries. My cousin Jake always ran the show, 38 shiny watch, loud voice dealership owner. Everyone in town called him a success story. He'd greet you with a handshake and a story that somehow circled back to his own brilliance. His dad, Uncle Ron, was a different breed, retired Navy SEAL, Vietnam-era veteran, the kind of man whose handshake still felt like a command. He'd been my childhood hero before I ever joined the Army. When I arrived that evening, Jake grinned and said, "Well, look who finally came home, the Army girl." He didn't mean it cruelly, not yet. But there's a certain tone people use when they say Army girl, the kind that sounds polite on the surface but slices underneath. I smiled, hugged my father, and tried to blend in. It didn't work. Jake was 3 beers in when he started teasing. He asked about my job, what department I was in. Before I could answer, he waved his hand. "I bet you're pushing papers, right? Filing logistics, or whatever it's called." I wiped my hands on a napkin, the air thick with that lazy late summer heat. "No," I said quietly, "I fly." He barked out a laugh. "Oh yeah, what's your call sign then?" That's when I looked at him, really looked at him the way you look at someone who's never seen the world outside their own fence line. "Iron Widow." His father's head snapped up. The sound of a beer can hissing open somewhere behind me cut through the silence. Uncle Ron's voice was low, steady, almost trembling. "Boy, apologize, now." Jake blinked, confused. "For what?" "Just do it." The rest of the family looked back and forth, whispering. I could feel the weight of curiosity and judgment pressing on my shoulders. I gave them a small smile. "It's okay," I said softly. He didn't know. But Uncle Ron knew. His eyes said it, all, the kind of recognition that carries years of unspoken history. I hadn't realized until that moment that he'd probably heard my call sign before, not at a family table, but on a military radio years ago. After the tension faded, the evening moved on, but my appetite didn't. I sat near the edge of the yard listening to the firecrackers crackle. Fireworks always made me flinch, though I'd gotten good at hiding it. Jake avoided eye contact the rest of the night. He probably thought I was exaggerating, or that Iron Widow was some kind of nickname I'd made up to sound cool. I didn't correct him. Let him think whatever he wanted. The truth was heavier than words. Because Iron Widow wasn't born from pride, it was born from loss. People like Jake thought service was medals and uniforms, glory and parades. They didn't know about the sandstorms, the sound of rotor blades echoing over burning fields, or the smell of hydraulic fluid mixed with blood. They didn't know how a woman becomes a call sign she never asked for. That night, as the fireworks burst over the fields, I felt my chest tighten. The lights reminded me of tracer rounds, red, white, gold streaks across a black sky. My father sat a few chairs away, laughing at a joke someone told about gas prices. He hadn't said much to me all night. We used to be close before the deployment. Now every sentence felt like a mission briefing, short, emotionless, efficient. I wanted to tell him that I was fine, that I wasn't haunted by what happened overseas. But that would have been a lie, and we both would have known it. Uncle Ron caught my eye once across the yard. He raised his beer, a small gesture of respect, and mouthed, "Proud of you." It was the first time anyone in that family had said those words to me since I came home. As the crowd thinned out, Jake's wife brought me a plate of pie. She tried to break the ice. "He didn't mean anything by it," she said quietly. "Jake jokes too much." I nodded. It's fine. She hesitated, then asked, So, Iron Widow, that's your call sign. I looked out toward the dark sky. Yeah, it used to be ours. She didn't understand what I meant, but that was okay. She smiled politely and walked away. I stayed a little longer staring at the fading embers of the barbecue pit, listening to the night. Somewhere a cicada buzzed slow and rhythmic. The same rhythm I'd heard from helicopter rotors years ago, the one that never really leaves your head once you've heard it long enough. That night, driving back to my motel, I replayed the moment again and again. Jake's laughter, Uncle Ron's voice, that single word, widow. Some names you earn, some names you survive. And some, like mine, you carry. I wasn't born Iron Widow. That name came from a night I still can't talk about without feeling the desert heat crawl down my back. It was 2013, Kandahar Province. I was 29 and serving as Captain Morgan Carter, U.S. Army Aviation, 160th SOAR, the Night Stalkers. We flew where no one else wanted to fly. We went where maps faded into sand and the sky turned copper from fire. We were supposed to pick up wounded Marines after an ambush. A simple extraction, they called it. In and out in 20 minutes, they said. Every pilot knows those words are cursed. That afternoon, the air was thick with dust. You could taste it like iron and chalk. My co-pilot, Lieutenant Daniel Ross, my fiancé, sat beside me, his hand tapping a rhythm on the console. He did that when he was nervous. I used to tease him that one day the Army would promote him just to get him to stop tapping. He smiled before takeoff. You still good, Carter? I nodded. Always. We lifted off at 1900 hours. The sky was turning orange. From above, Afghanistan looked endless, like a world made of nothing but dust and ghosts. As we approached the drop zone, the radio crackled. Eagle 1 taking heavy fire. Repeat, heavy, then static. Ross cursed under his breath. I looked down, saw the flashes. The ground was on fire. Approach from the west, I told him. Less open terrain. We descended fast. The bullets came faster. I could hear them ping against the frame, sharp like hailstones on steel. 30 seconds, Ross said. Copy, keep her steady. We landed hard, too hard, but we were down. Dust and smoke filled the cockpit. Marines ran toward us, carrying wounded. Blood soaked their sleeves. The smell of diesel and metal burned my throat. That's when the second blast hit. The impact threw Ross forward into the controls. The windshield spidered. I remember screaming his name, but he didn't move. There's a kind of silence that happens right after an explosion, a pause between worlds. It's the sound of life deciding whether you get another second or not. Get them on board, I shouted. My voice didn't sound like mine. A young Marine, couldn't have been more than 20, yelled, Ma'am, he's hit. I know movie. I grabbed the controls, one hand on the collective, one on the cyclic. My headset was half dead, my ears ringing. I didn't have time to think. We lifted off with 9 souls on board. I was alone in the cockpit, half blind from smoke flying by instinct and prayer. The radio finally came back. Eagle 2, this is command, do you copy? Copy, I said, breath shaking. Where's Ross? I looked at the empty seat beside me. He's gone. Static filled the line. Then Godspeed, Iron Widow. I didn't understand at first. Then I realized that was me. They were calling me Iron Widow. I flew for another hour that night, escorting 2 more birds, refusing to land until every man was home. By dawn, the news had already spread through the 160th. She kept flying after he died. That's how legends start, not because you want them to, but because other people need them to. When I got back stateside, they pinned a distinguished flying cross on my uniform. They called it courage. I called it muscle memory. Courage implies a choice. I didn't have one. They sent me home a hero, but I felt like a ghost. The Army psychologist said, you have survivor's guilt. I said I have a name I never asked for. At the ceremony, reporters asked what Iron Widow meant. I smiled for the cameras. It's just a call sign, I said. But it wasn't. It was the echo of a man who'd once said he'd always fly beside me. Sometimes I still heard his tapping the rhythm on the console in my dreams. Coming home wasn't easy. People think the hardest part of war is the noise. It's not. It's the quiet after. The first time I walked into a grocery store, I froze at the sound of a balloon popping. The woman behind me dropped a jar and I ducked like I was still in the cockpit. The guy bagging groceries said, "Lady, you okay?" I nodded, smiled, and lied. That's what veterans do. At night, I'd sit on my porch with a glass of water and stare at the sky. When a helicopter flew overhead, I'd catch myself looking up, not out of fear, but longing. It's strange how the thing that nearly kills you can also be the thing you miss most. A few months later, a letter came, a request to speak at a memorial for fallen aviators. I almost said no, but something in me wanted to face it. That's where I saw Uncle Ron again for the first time since childhood. He was there for a friend who'd served in the same region. He recognized me before I even saw him. "You were there that night," he said quietly. "Operation Scorpion Nest." I nodded. He placed a hand on my shoulder, firm and respectful. "You saved 6 Marines. You brought my teammate home." That's when I realized he knew my name long before the barbecue. And maybe deep down that's why his voice trembled when he said, "Boy, apologize now." Back then I thought the war had taken everything from me, my partner, my peace, my future. But in truth it had given me something too: clarity, the kind that strips away ego and leaves only what matters. When you've flown through fire and smoke, the small things, pride, gossip, money, stop meaning much. Still, sometimes when I sit alone and hear that faint echo of rotor blades in my head, I whisper the same promise I made that night. "I'll keep flying, Ross, just me this time." You'd think that after a night like that, after everything I'd done, coming home would feel like victory. It didn't. Coming home felt like landing in a country that had moved on without me. Airports, parades, flags. They all looked the same, but the rhythm was different. People rushed past one another with earbuds in, eyes down, talking about traffic or reality TV. Nobody was watching the sky anymore. When I first stepped back onto U.S. soil, I expected relief. Instead, I felt small, like I didn't fit anywhere. The Army sent me to Fort Rucker, Alabama as an instructor for new aviators. They said I'd earned a slower pace. The truth was, they didn't know what else to do with me. I was too valuable to lose, too broken to deploy. The days there were hot and quiet. My students were young, fresh faces who hadn't seen blood yet. I taught them flight control, night maneuvers, emergency protocol. But every time I said engine failure, my hands would tremble. I learned to hide it by gripping the lectern tighter. Outside of class, I didn't talk much. The other instructors had families. On weekends, they'd take their kids fishing, post pictures of little league games. I'd go back to my quarters, sit with a single beer and stare at the ceiling fan, the closest thing to rotor blades I could find. My father called sometimes. He meant well, but we didn't know how to talk anymore. He'd ask, "You thinking about getting out of the Army yet?" I'd say, "Not sure." Then there'd be that silence, the kind that only happens when two people are related, but live in different worlds. He never asked about Ross, maybe because he didn't know how, or maybe because he was afraid of what I'd say. When he finally visited one spring, he looked at my ribbons, my photos, and said, "I'm proud you made something of yourself, kiddo. But you can't stay in forever. You'll want a real life someday." A real life. I just smiled, maybe. He didn't mean it as an insult, but it cut deep. People who've never served don't understand this is real life. The uniform isn't a costume, it's a second skin. After he left, I realized something even my own father didn't see me anymore. That summer I tried dating, a civilian. It lasted 2 dinners. He was kind, but when I mentioned Ross, he said, "You've got to move on. He wouldn't want you stuck in the past." He was probably right. Still, I never called him again. On base, people respected me, but outside those gates, I was just that woman in uniform. Once at the grocery store, a teenager saw my name tag and said, "Whoa, you were in Afghanistan. Did you ever, shoot anyone?" His mother gasped and shushed him, but I laughed it off. I didn't tell him that my weapon was a helicopter and my job was to fly through hell. That's the thing about America, we love our soldiers in theory, but when they come home we don't know what to do with them. When my enlistment was almost up, I took a drive north back to Virginia. The town hadn't changed much. The diner still served the same burnt coffee, the same waitress still called everyone Han. But I had changed. The people who once felt like home now felt like spectators. My cousins all had houses, mortgages, kids. I had medals and memories that didn't fit into small talk. At a family dinner, Jake, same cousin from the barbecue, asked if I'd finally finished that Army stuff. I said not yet. He smirked. Still doing that paperwork thing. The table laughed. My father stayed quiet. I could have corrected him. Could have told them what I'd done, who I'd saved. but what would that change? So I just smiled, something like that. Later that night when I stepped outside for air, Uncle Ron joined me. He didn't say much. He never did. He just lit a cigarette and said, "I knew a guy once, pilot like you." Didn't talk about it much either. "Yeah," I asked. "Yeah," he said, exhaling smoke. "The ones who don't talk usually have the heaviest stories." He looked at me, then eyes soft but knowing. "You still flying?" "Not lately." He nodded slowly. "Don't stop too long. Grounded birds forget what the wind feels like." It was the kind of advice only an old seal could give, part poetry, part pain. The next morning I packed my things and drove to Arlington National Cemetery. I didn't plan it, I just ended up there. I walked past rows and rows of white headstones until I found his Leighton Daniel Ross. Someone had left a small flag beside it. I knelt, tracing the engraved letters with my thumb. "I went to the barbecue, Danny," I said softly. "They still think I file paperwork." A breeze moved through the trees. The flags along the path fluttered like the sound of rotor blades. I laughed a little, the kind of laugh that comes right before tears. "I'm still flying, though," I whispered, still keeping my promise. When I stood, an elderly veteran in a wheelchair saluted me as I passed. I returned it crisp, silent with my heart. That moment reminded me the world may forget, but the ones who wore the uniform never do. A week later, I got a call from the local VA hospital, asking if I'd help with their pilot outreach program. They said they needed someone who could speak the language. I hesitated, then I said yes. It wasn't flying, but maybe it was something close, a way to lift others instead of aircraft. That's where I'd be when Jake saw me again months later, and that's where he'd finally learn who Iron Widow really was. But before that, I had one more lesson waiting, the kind that didn't happen in the sky, but right here on the ground. The VA hospital became my new kind of battlefield. Not one with smoke and gunfire, this one smelled like antiseptic and slow coffee. But the people there were the same kind of warriors, broken in body, strong in spirit, and invisible to most of the world. My role was to help veterans transition, teach them to navigate benefits, job programs, civilian life. Most days it meant listening more than speaking. Sometimes I saw my own reflection in their pain. There was a Marine named Cole, 25, missing his left leg. He'd joke about it. "At least I get through airport security faster." But his eyes told the truth. He'd lost more than a limb, he'd lost his purpose. I spent hours helping him fill out forms, then teaching him how to drive again. Every time I watched him take those first turns in the parking lot, gripping the wheel like it was his rifle, I felt something shift inside me, something that had been stuck since Kandahar. Helping others heal was helping me heal. But every weekend I went back home, that peace evaporated. My family still didn't get it. At Sunday dinners, the same jokes resurfaced. Jake bragged about selling cars, his new vacation home in Florida, how his dealership supported veterans with a 10% discount. "That's good," I'd say, "real generous." He'd grin. "We even sponsor a parade every Veterans Day. I should get a medal myself." Everyone laughed. My father didn't say much, but his silence hurt worse than mockery. Sometimes silence means agreement. I'd try to tell them about the hospital, about the soldiers learning to walk again, but they'd change the subject. My aunt would ask about dating. Jake would talk about gas prices. My father would ask if I'd thought about moving on from the army. "Dad," I said one night, "I'm not stuck in the past. I'm serving in a different way now." He sighed. "I just don't want to see you alone your whole life, Morgan." "I'm not alone," I said softly. "I'm surrounded by people who understand me, just not here." He didn't reply. He just nodded like he was conceding a point he didn't agree with. Then one Friday, everything changed. I stopped by my father's house after work and heard laughter from the living room. Jake was there, showing him photos on his phone, a big farmhouse freshly painted white. "Bought it cheap," Jake said proudly. "Some veteran's estate. The family couldn't keep up with it." I froze. I knew that house. I'd been there once, Ross's family home, the place his parents lost after his death. "Where'd you say you got it?" I asked. Jake looked up. "Auction. Why?" I stared at him. That house belonged to Lieutenant Ross. He died in Afghanistan. He was I stopped myself. He was a friend. Jake shrugged. "Business is business. His parents should have managed better." Something inside me snapped. "You don't talk about a fallen soldier's family like that." Jake frowned. "Relax, Morgan. You act like I committed treason." You wouldn't understand treason if it saluted you." My father's voice cut through, "Enough, both of you." But Jake smirked. "See, this is what I mean. She takes everything personally. You think wearing that uniform makes you better than us." I could have shouted, could have told him about Ross, about the men I saved the nights I flew through fire. Instead, I just said quietly, "No." "But it makes me accountable to something you'll never understand." Then I walked out. The next morning, my father came by the VA center. He looked awkward, like he didn't belong among wheelchairs and prosthetics. He waited until I finished a counseling session, then said Jake told me what happened. I braced myself. He shouldn't have said what he said, my father admitted. "But you can't keep holding the war over people, Morgan. We all have burdens." "I'm not holding it over anyone," I said. "I'm just tired of pretending it didn't happen." He sighed. "You know, I drove trucks in Nam. Didn't see combat, but I hauled supplies. I never talked about it much. Maybe that's why I don't understand how to talk to you." That was the first time he'd mentioned his own service. I didn't even know he'd been over there. "Dad," I said softly, "you served too." He shrugged. "I just did my job." "So did I." We sat in silence. It wasn't comfortable, but it was honest. Before he left, he looked around the room, the vets, the wheelchairs, the quiet dignity. "You do good work here," he said. "You help people." "Thanks," I said. As he turned to go, I asked, "You coming to the barbecue next week?" He smiled faintly. "Wouldn't miss it. Maybe I'll bring a flag." That barbecue, the one where it all came to a head, wasn't supposed to be special, but somehow it felt heavier that year. I saw Jake setting up chairs, laughing like nothing had happened. His father, Uncle Ron, stood by the grill flipping burgers. When I walked in, he nodded respectfully, not a word, just that old soldier's acknowledgement. Jake greeted me with forced politeness. "Hey, cousin, no hard feelings, right?" "None," I said. But something in my tone made him pause. He didn't know it yet, but that night in front of the whole family, he'd get a lesson in what service truly meant, and it wouldn't come from me raising my voice. It would come from the one man in that yard who actually knew who Iron Widow was. As the sun dipped low and the flag waved in the warm breeze, I realized something profound. People like Jake don't hate soldiers, they just can't imagine being one. And people like my father, they love you, but they can't always say it in the language of medals and ranks. That night would finally translate it all. If there's one thing about my family, it's that they never stop talking, even when they should. That night the yard glowed with string lights and the smell of grilled corn ribs and smoke. Laughter carried through the trees. From a distance, it probably looked like an all-American celebration, family, freedom, and faith. But under that warm glow, something else simmered, unspoken tension, pride, and ignorance dressed up as humor. I sat near the end of the picnic table, sipping iced tea, half listening to Jake brag about his new dealership expansion. Every few sentences, he'd slide in a joke about the government paycheck crowd. "You know what I like about running my own business," he said, loud enough for the whole yard. "Nobody tells me what to do. No bosses, no uniforms." My aunt laughed. "And no paperwork." I smiled faintly. It was almost funny how predictable they were. Jake noticed. "Oh, don't give me that look, Morgan. You've got a whole filing cabinet of reports waiting back at Fort whatever." The table chuckled. I put down my drink. "I'm not stationed anymore." He grinned. "So you finally retired from paperwork?" My father's fork scraped against his plate. Uncle Ron shifted his weight by the grill but said nothing. I looked at Jake, my voice calm. "No, I fly." That earned another laugh. "You fly," he said, shaking his head. "What drones, paper planes?" "No," I said, "Blackhawks." The laughter faltered, replaced by uneasy silence. Then he forced a chuckle. "Oh, come on, you're kidding, right?" I didn't answer. That's when Uncle Ron stepped forward, slow and deliberate, flipping the tongs onto the table. "She's not kidding," he said. "She's a Night Stalker. 160th SOAR." Jake frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Ron's voice dropped an octave. "It means your cousin flew into places where men like me couldn't get out without her." A hush fell over the yard. Fireworks cracked in the distance, faint echoes of a truth too heavy for the moment. Jake tried to recover with a laugh. "Oh yeah, what's her call sign then?" I wiped my hands on a napkin. My pulse didn't rise, my face didn't change. "Iron Widow." You could have heard a pin drop. Uncle Ron froze. His hand clenched once, then relaxed. The lines on his face deepened, recognition, respect, maybe even guilt. He turned toward his son, his voice steady but cold. "Boy, apologize, now." Jake blinked. What I was just... Now. It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. Jake looked at me, confused, embarrassed. "I'm sorry," he mumbled. I nodded once. "It's all right." But it wasn't. The air changed after that. The jokes stopped. Conversations turned softer. Someone turned off the music. Even the smell of the grill seemed quieter. Uncle Ron handed me a plate of ribs, the same gesture he'd used years ago when I was just little Morgan. Only this time he said, "For the pilot." It was simple, but it meant everything. My father stood nearby, arms crossed, eyes glistening in the light of the fire pit. He didn't say a word, but he didn't need to. For once he looked at me not as his daughter, but as a soldier. That night I saw respect replace misunderstanding. Not because I demanded it, but because the truth spoke for itself. As the night went on, a few cousins came over quietly. One said, "I didn't know Morgan. You never talk about it." "I don't need to," I said. "Not until someone asks with real interest." Jake kept his distance for most of the evening. Near the end, though, he approached. He looked smaller than usual, humbled. "Hey," he said, "I looked you up on my phone." "Yeah. Operation Scorpion Nest. You were there." I nodded. He let out a slow breath. "My dad's unit helped secure that perimeter. He told me once about a pilot who kept flying after her bird got hit. Said she was the bravest person he'd ever heard of." I didn't answer. Jake looked down. "That was you, wasn't it?" "Yeah," I said quietly. "That was me." He swallowed hard. "Guess I owe you more than an apology." "Just learn something from it," I said. He nodded, eyes wet. "I will." After most of the guests left, Uncle Ron came to sit beside me. He didn't speak for a while. The night air carried the smell of charcoal and grass. "I heard your call sign on the radio that night," he said. "Didn't know who it belonged to, but I remembered it." "Small world," I said. "Not that small," he replied. "The people who serve, we always cross paths again somehow." He paused, looking toward the American flag hanging from the porch. "You made us proud, Iron Widow." I smiled faintly. "I just did my job." "That's what we all say," he murmured. "Doesn't make it less true." As I drove home that night, I didn't feel angry anymore. I just felt understood. The truth had a way of humbling people, not by shaming them, but by showing them what honor really looks like when it's quiet. They finally saw me, not as the army girl, not as a name on a family tree, but as someone who had served and survived. And that was enough. The morning after the barbecue, I woke up to sunlight spilling through thin motel curtains and the soft hum of cicadas outside. My phone was buzzing nonstop. Missed calls, messages mostly from Jake. I didn't answer any of them at first. Part of me wanted to let him sit with the weight of last night a little longer. Some lessons need silence to settle in. When I finally picked up his 10th call, his voice sounded nothing like the man who'd mocked me 24 hours earlier. "Hey Morgan," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" I sighed. "Jake, I've got work in an hour." "Please, just a few minutes. I'll meet you at the VA place." That caught me off guard. "You sure you want to step into that world?" "Yeah," he said. "I think I need to." He showed up wearing jeans and a dealership polo, looking out of place against the stream of wheelchairs and service dogs moving through the VA courtyard. He carried 2 coffees like a peace offering. We sat on a bench under a faded flag. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Jake cleared his throat. "I looked up your record last night. Took me a while to find the real stuff, not the public articles, the citations." I nodded, waiting. "I found the after-action report for Scorpion Nest," he continued. "It said your co-pilot was killed in the first blast, said you flew out under fire with no navigator. You saved 6 Marines." His voice cracked a little. "My dad, he was on the recovery team that brought the last bird home. He never told me that part." I looked down at my coffee. "He probably didn't think you were ready to hear it." Jake exhaled. "You're right." "Then softer, I'm sorry, Morgan, for everything I said, for being so damn arrogant." I studied him for a long moment. "You don't owe me an apology, Jake. You owe it to the people who never made it back." He nodded, eyes glassy. "That's why I came here. I want to help somehow. I don't know what to do, but I can learn." I smiled for the first time in a long time. "You just did the hardest part, showing up." That afternoon I brought him inside. We walked through the physical therapy wing where veterans were learning to walk again. Cole, the Marine with one leg, waved from the treadmill. "Morning, ma'am," he said cheerfully. "Hey, Cole," I replied. "This is my cousin Jake." Jake hesitated, then extended his hand. "Pleasure to meet you, man." Cole grinned. "You the cousin who runs that fancy car lot?" Jake chuckled. "That's me." "Then maybe you can help me drive again," Cole said, tapping his prosthetic. Jake smiled wider. "You got it." Something shifted in that moment, an understanding that didn't need rank or medals. It was the bridge between two worlds that never should have been apart in the first place. Over the next few weeks, Jake came back not just once, but often. He brought lunch, handed out coffee, donated wheelchairs through his dealership network. But what struck me most wasn't his money. It was his silence. He listened, really listened. He'd sit beside the veterans and ask about their service, their families, their favorite songs. And for once, he didn't talk about himself. One day he pulled me aside. "You know, Morgan," he said, "I used to think honor was something you wore, medals, uniforms, the whole deal. Now I see it's what you do when nobody's clapping." I nodded. "That's about right." He looked around the rehab room at the men and women slowly reclaiming their lives. "You've been doing this every day." "Yeah," I said softly, "it's my mission now." He took a deep breath. "Then count me in." Back home, word spread through the family that Jake had changed. He stopped boasting at dinners, started listening to Uncle Ron's old war stories, even asked my father to help raise funds for the hospital. At first, Dad was skeptical. "He's just trying to make himself look good," he muttered. Maybe I said, but sometimes doing good comes before being good. That got a small smile out of him. One weekend, Jake invited me and Dad to his dealership for a surprise. When we arrived, the front showroom had been cleared out. In its place stood a gleaming silver truck wrapped in red, white, and blue vinyl. Across the hood were the words, "Honor Line Veteran Transport Initiative." He handed me a set of keys. "It's for the VA, for patient transport. We'll cover maintenance and gas. Figured it's the least we can do." I was speechless. My father put a hand on Jake's shoulder. "You did good, son." Jake looked at me. "You taught me something I should have learned years ago. Service isn't about showing off. It's about showing up." I smiled. Guess we're even then. That night, as the sun dipped low over the parking lot, Dad and I stood beside the truck in silence. He glanced at me, really looked at me this time. "I never told you this," he said, "but when you first enlisted, I was scared. Not proud scared. I thought I'd lose you like we lost your mom." I turned to him. "I know, Dad." He nodded slowly. "But last night when I saw Ron make Jake apologize, and I heard that name Iron Widow, I realized I already lost you once to a war I'll never understand. And you still came back stronger." He paused. "I'm proud of you, Captain." The words landed softly like a medal placed without ceremony. I blinked hard, looking up at the flag waving over the lot. "Thanks, Dad." He grinned. "Now don't make me call you ma'am." We both laughed, something we hadn't done together in years. When I drove home that night, I thought about all of it, the war, the call sign, the barbecue, the apologies. It wasn't revenge that made me feel whole, it was understanding. People can change if you give them the truth and the time to face it. Maybe that's the real mission, not to win arguments, but to win hearts. And maybe, just maybe, even the proudest voices in America can learn the quiet language of respect. Veterans Day arrived crisp and cold, the kind of November morning that smells like pine diesel and coffee. The town square was draped in red, white, and blue. Folding chairs lined Main Street, and people gathered in jackets, waving little flags. I stood at the edge of the parade route in uniform, my blues pressed, my ribbons shining in the early sun. Across my shoulders, the banner read, "In honor of those who fly, so others may live." Behind me, a formation of young cadets practiced their steps nervously. Ahead of me, a brass band tuned their horns. It had been 10 years since that night in Kandahar, a decade of ghosts, healing, and slow forgiveness. When the parade marshal gave the signal, we began to march. Boots struck pavement in steady rhythm, the sound echoing like rotor blades. I glanced toward the crowd. Near the front row, I saw my father standing tall, hand over heart. Beside him, Jake waved the stars and stripes, his face lit with quiet pride. Uncle Ron saluted as I passed, eyes wet but smiling. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the lone soldier in the family. I felt like part of something whole again. After the ceremony, we all met at the park for coffee and pie, the same group that once bickered over barbecue and jokes. But now the laughter sounded different, softer, kinder. Jake leaned over the picnic table. You know, he said, I used to think Veterans Day was just for parades. Now I see it's for people, the ones sitting right next to us. Uncle Ron clapped his shoulder. That's the spirit, son. Dad looked at me. So what's next for you, Captain Carter? I smiled. Retirement maybe, but not from service. The VA's building a new pilot rehabilitation center. I'll be helping design the curriculum. Jake grinned. Let me guess, no paperwork involved. I laughed. Plenty, but this time I don't mind. It's paperwork that saves lives. Dad shook his head in disbelief. You always did find a way to make me proud. I looked at him, really looked the lines of age, the gentleness behind his eyes. You already did that, Dad. You raised me to keep my promises. He reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Guess I did. Later that afternoon, a group of kids from the local school approached our table. One of them, a boy no older than 10, asked shyly, Ma'am, are you really a pilot? I nodded. Was. Now I help other pilots fly again. He smiled wide. That's so cool. My grandpa was in the Navy. Well, I said then, you've got service in your blood. He ran off waving his little flag, and I felt something warm in my chest, not pride exactly, but peace. When the crowd thinned, I walked toward the memorial wall near the courthouse. Names were etched in granite, glinting in the light. I found Ross's name and traced it with my glove. I kept flying, I whispered. But now, I think I'm finally home. The wind picked up, rustling the flags above me. For a moment I could almost hear rotor blades again, not in fear, but as a memory set free. Jake joined me a few minutes later, holding 2 cups of coffee. He offered me one. Never figured coffee could taste better when you earn it. I smiled. That's because you stopped chasing approval. He nodded, thoughtful. You know what I realized? Morgan, America's full of people like me, proud, loud, and blind. We don't mean to disrespect anyone. We just don't see what's right in front of us. I took a sip. Then keep your eyes open. That's how respect starts. He smiled. Deal. That evening we all went back to Dad's house for dinner. Not a barbecue this time, just family and quiet conversation. On the mantel above the fireplace sat an old photo, me in uniform beside Ross, both of us smiling, young and unscarred. Dad noticed me looking at it. He'd be proud of you too, he said. I nodded. He already told me once in his own way. Jake furrowed his brow. How? I smiled faintly. Every time I fly over someone's homecoming, every time a vet stands again, that's him saying, keep going. After dinner, Dad turned on the porch light and stepped outside. The stars were out bright over the Virginia woods. I joined him. You know, he said quietly, I used to think respect was earned by what you accomplish. Now I think it's earned by how you treat people who've already given everything. I nodded. That's the lesson I wish more folks understood. He looked over, his voice soft. You think the country will ever learn? Maybe, I said, one story at a time. We stood there in silence as a distant helicopter crossed the horizon, its red light blinking through the dark. The sound was faint, almost gentle. Dad smiled. You still get that look when you hear them. I probably always will. He chuckled. Then I guess you'll always be my Iron Widow. I smiled back. Not a widow anymore, Dad. Just a pilot who came home. When I returned to my car, Jake handed me a folded paper. Inside was a donation check for the new rehab center signed in memory of Lieutenant Daniel Ross. I figured it was time to put my money somewhere that matters, he said. I swallowed hard. He'd have liked that. Jake smiled. So do I. Driving home, the road stretched out under the fading autumn sky. I passed fields, old barns, flagpoles. I thought about the people who'd never come back, and the ones who did, still fighting quietly in their own way. The radio played soft country, something about home, forgiveness, and time. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. For the first time in years, it didn't sting. It just felt like flight. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt unseen, whether you served or simply stood beside someone who did, I hope you remember this. Respect doesn't start with rank. It starts with empathy. You don't need a uniform to serve or medals to matter. You just need heart and the courage to listen. If this story moved, you share it. Tell someone about the quiet heroes in your life. Subscribe if you believe in remembering them not with noise but with understanding. Because honor isn't loud, it's steady, and it still flies.